Hello, everybody. Once again, I am Lehman Crafton, aka Zorvalachan, Less Than Guru, and we are going to talk about the crunch, the mechanics of the original Torg. And I'm definitely not having a background in this one because when I hold up books and stuff, it really goes off, and I will have some examples and displays and things like that to use both books and cards and things like that. So I definitely have to do this normal. Um, we will, as I said, get into the crunch. Tomorrow I hope to do kind of like the wrap up plus other things that the Game Master had and players for Torg resources. But the crunch, I want to go through character creation, how it could be extremely easy, and then some of the subsystems. I won't, even though this whole series is deep dive, I don't want to do a deep dive into every subsystem because then I would have to have a video for every single subsystem. Now, if you want that, if you want me to go through every single subsystem, leave some comments. Let me know, and in the future I could add to this series and do subsystems for everything, like a magic video, a miracle video, a cybernetics video, a decking video, a martial arts video, etc., and just do a video for every single subsystem. But I'll just kind of touch on those. But I kind of wanted to do the mechanics and what the main part to me were the good things about Torg, why it was different than every other game out there, and why I really loved it. To me, Torg was one of the very easiest games. At one time I said easiest, but since that time there's been hundreds of games that have come out since then, and probably a lot that are easier. But it is an extremely easy game to play once you know the core mechanic. Once you know the core mechanic, you have no problem. Then you start adding subsystems to that core mechanic, and how complex or not complex would be what that subsystem is. And you don't have to have a subsystem. There are characters, many characters out there that don't have magic or miracles. They just shoot or they do other things, and they don't need any subsystem at all. Mars heard me and jumped up in my lap because he's my apparently my video pal. Every time I think every time, maybe except for once, he's come to say hi. He doesn't really say hi to you. He says hi to me, but I guess it could. Mars, look, there's people watching. You don't care. Okay, so back to Torg. So Torg, very easy to play. It only got as complex as you wanted it to get, and what subsystems, what type of thing. If I want to be a mage, then I need to know how to cast spells. If I want to design spells, then I'm going to have to know that subsystem on how to design the spells. If I want to do psionics, I'm going to have to learn that. But it's based off of what type of character you're choosing. For the Game Master, though, it was always difficult because the Game Master had to know the general core mechanic, which is easy, and then he had to know, or she, the Game Master had to know every single subsystem that all the players had, and any NPCs that had a subsystem tied to them that the players might not have. So if you don't have anybody with cyberware, but you have an NPC with cyberware, you'll need to know what cyberware does, because there are certain things that happen that can bring that cyberware into effect during the game. So I have some examples and some things to show. So here is a character sheet of Torg, and I will note, in case anybody who's familiar with Torg, that yes, I did a house rule of wounds. Normally you had 4 levels of wounds. With the 4th you were dead. So it was like light wounded, wounded, heavy wounded, dead. So you took 4 wounds, you would be dead. So I added 2 more wounds. It was a rule, I believe, in the Master Book, which is a system that was based off of Torg. After Torg, the original Torg, kind of got towards the end, they made a book I want to say it was called Shatter Zone. I never had it. One of my friends who liked Torg had it. It was kind of like a space game that used Torg-like rules. And there might have been one Blood Shadows, or was that it? If you know about it, leave it in the comments. That was maybe use the Torg rules. But then there came to be the Master Book rules, which is kind of funny because everything's based off of a D20, and way before the D20 became kind of standard, early 2000, Torg had a Master Book, which was just Torg is based off of a D20, and they use similar rules. So at the beginning, Torg had the 4 wound levels, with the last one being dead, and there were no modifiers depending on how you're wounded. And what I decided to do was give all the player characters 2 more wounds. So I did it as light, moderate, heavy, incapacitated, and mortal, and then dead. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 wounds, and then 6 dead. So basically 2 more wounds. But I made my players would get penalties depending on how wounded they were. Now for NPCs, to make it easier for me, since I'm having to do a bunch, I just gave them 4 wounds and no penalties. So players had to keep track of penalties. Whether or not you think that's easy or bad, I don't know. I think some of my players probably ignored it, and other players are really sticklers for making sure that they did it right. If I did original Torg again, maybe I'd have 5 wounds and no penalties or something, but that's not now. I just wanted to point out that this little part here is different than the actual official Torg character sheet, because that was one of the few house rules that I had. But as you'll see, it's a very simple character sheet. You can have your player name, your spiritual, or your 4 axioms: magic, spirit, social, and tech. Your possibilities you could write in there, what your home cosm was, your character name, age, height, weight, all that stuff. Shock, damage, KO conditions, which I'll explain, wound levels. Then you had a whole thing of skills. You see that reality. Every Storm Knight had a reality. They were reality rated. They're the ones who could manipulate reality. Your attributes here: Dex, Strength, Toughness, Perception, Mind, Charisma, and Spirit. And then approved actions were here, and all but Strength and Toughness had a approved action that was based off of that. And I'll explain that. You had movement rates, so these were derived attributes. A place to write cards, because Torg had cards, and a lot of people think, oh, cards is that extra step. And, cards were awesome. Believe me, it might take you a little while to get used to them, but once you get into them, they're awesome. Weapons, armor, and then this weird little bonus chart at the bottom, which is the key ingredient to Torg. There's nothing on the back. That's where you could write equipment, notes, whatever. They did have, in one of the books, they had a spell list, so you could do spells, and then I made one for like martial art lists and stuff like that. Pretty easy to do, and it was just easier for me to print it off and hand them to my players. With this, and with all your source books, and like this was that world book that I talked about, you have these templates, and on one side they have kind of just a discussion of them, a little tag skill, but on the other side they had one of those character sheets filled out for you. Now there was a way to make characters on your own, and it was you get 60 points that you could distribute out among your attributes. There was a minimum and a maximum depending on what race, etc. you were. You could just put those out, and then you had 16 points that you could spend on your skills. You would pick one skill as a tag skill. That was 3 of those 16 points, and you at least had to have 1 point go into reality, so that was 1 point. So basically you had 4 points of that 16 that were specific, and then the other 12 could go wherever you wanted to, up to, I believe, 2. Tag skill could be 3. What I did though is I always require templates, and it's funny because when I do Torg Eternity, I kind of have completely flipped that, where I think the character creation's a little more easier in Torg Eternity. It's easy just to do it instead of having to worry about what they call archetypes. But really, archetypes are just easy, and maybe it's because, and I think this is why, because I did have, again, I didn't have a ton of house rules, but I had enough. And one of my house rules was, as you could see with all of these templates, they had a bunch of skills filled in. Now, those were skills that if you chose a template, you could choose from. What I did was I said that even skills that you didn't put an add in, you didn't put one of your 16 points in, you still considered that to be trained, but at a 0. It's a rule that I just came up with to just be nice and to say that's why you want to play a template in my game and not worry. I did offer, if you really want to make a character from scratch, you can, but any skills you don't have adds in, you don't have. This gave the incentive, and it made it easy for me to just say, okay, if I don't like a certain template, I just don't allow it. Now you might ask, how many templates are there? And I have a list of them. So right here is my list of all the realms, all the realities, and all the templates that were based off of those realities. So there is a ton to choose from. And it got to a point where there were so many of these that people were doing like the same one, like Dark Avenger template. Like everybody at every time wanted to be a Dark Avenger. So I made a blanket rule that in play there could only be one template in play at the same time, and if any template got used twice, I didn't allow it anymore because I just wanted to see more variety. But as a game master, you could let anybody be whatever templates. I did allow very small minor adjustments, like certain clerics that they would say like Cleric of Dunad, and I would make it so that it could be a cleric of any Eilish deity or things like that. So I did allow certain adjustments, but mainly it was just, here's your template, here's your equipment, all your stats are already figured out for your 60 points. All you had to do was make sure at least one, because it gave the templates also gave you that tag skill. So your tag skill was done, you had 13 points, at least one had to go to reality, but you split up the rest however you wanted, maximum of 2, because your tag skill was supposed to be the skill that you're good at. So that's basically how your character is made. Very, very easy. You distribute points, you write down a list of equipment, and that's your character. Now, when you have the character sheet here with all the skills, what you do is, and I'll actually bring out, I should have got one of my old characters, but we'll use this human tribal shaman. And they have a conjuration of 3, that's their tag skill. And you add that to their mind. And their mind over here is an 11. So normally they're going to have a 14, and that's your value. So once you had all of your adds, then you would just add it to your attribute, and you would get a value, and that would be your base value. Okay, I hope you're with me. I think that's pretty easy. You assign your 16 points. What ones you have points, you add it to the attribute, and that gets your value. Now, Torg did have a system that many people don't understand, or I won't say they don't understand, they're not aware of. Torg allowed any skill to go with any attribute to get a value. It's just certain ones were the common ones. But a lot of people thought that that was the only skill. This is based off of this skill, but that's incorrect. And even in Torg Eternity, that's the same. Basically, if I'm shooting a gun, it's going to be based off of dex. But if I need to repair a gun or identify a gun, figure out what's wrong with a gun, something like that, I might, as a game master, say, okay, give me a fire combat, but base it off of your mind, not off your dex. Makes sense. It was allowed. It's in the rules. But I think a lot of players and game masters don't realize that, but it is. It allows you to use those skills very well. Now there's a lot of skills in original Torg. I won't go through them all, but there were a ton. And basically when you got to the Godnet, it was almost like every type of real world skill, you had a computer version of it, a Godnet version of it, and it just, I can show you a skill list just so you can see how many skills there were, because my handy dandy keep me organized and condense the rules down. I guess I should have maybe tried to bookmark this at the beginning. I thought it would be at the beginning. Do I not have that master skill list? There's master charts. Here we go. So that's all the skills, and it also put every single reality and yes or no, meaning was that available to them. Even if it said no, you could figure it out later. But Torg had a weird system where if you didn't have a skill and wanted to learn it, you would have to figure out, did it come from my reality? Did it not come from my reality? Do I have a trainer? Do I not have a trainer? And to get that first point, it would be a varying number depending on what type of skill, where you were from, whether you had a trainer, things like that. But normally, once you had adds in that skill to advance it, you cost possibilities. And it was easy that if you wanted to raise it from a 1 to a 2, it cost 2. If you wanted to raise it from a 3 to a 4, it cost 4, etc. Now there was a little thing about specialization. I really won't get to that, but each skill you could choose a specialization, which you would put a flat fee into of possibilities, and then it gave you a +1 if you were doing a certain type of whatever that skill was. And then they came up with the trademark, which was a very specific one item or one maybe spell that then you would get a little extra bonus for a one-time flat fee. And an example, if you want to think of like TV series and stuff, if you have beast riding, the Lone Ranger has beast riding, its horses would be his specialty, and silver would be his trademark, his horse. That's his horse. So you could do that. We had a realm runner that was a pilot that had a Grumman Goose plane that could land on water or on land on a runway, and that plane he named "Oh Lordy" because it was always like, "Oh Lordy, I hope this plane doesn't fall apart." It was an ongoing joke, but he had air vehicles specialized in Grumman Goose and trademarked into "Oh Lordy." So that specific item, that specific airplane, was the one that was his plane, which I always felt was very, very cinematic. I mean, there's a lot of TV shows in that where somebody has a weapon. One of my favorite early 2000s, maybe even, early 2000s shows, Farscape. John Crichton's gun that he liked was Winona. So, just certain things like that. And it can bring that into it. So you had those slight rule variants to the skills, but normally it was just how many adds plus your attribute, and that gave you a value. Now, when it came up in the game and you wanted to see if you succeeded, you would go, like a lot of systems, they have a difficulty number. If you're shooting at a person, their difficulty number would be what their dodge value is, which makes sense. They're trying to not get hit. You're trying to hit them. When you're going up and you have a melee weapon, but they don't have a melee weapon, they use unarmed combat, and you use your melee weapon against them. They don't have the weapon, so they don't use their melee weapon. Now, if they do have a melee weapon, then they would use their melee weapons skill. If you were unarmed and you were attacking them, you would use your unarmed combat. The weird variation of that was martial arts. Martial arts, depending on the martial arts, you could have a weapon or unarmed, but you just needed martial arts for either of those. So that was kind of an overlap skill. But what you would do is you'd roll a d20. And if you were possibility rated and trained in the skills, if you rolled a 10 or a 20, it exploded. And it kept exploding until you no longer rolled 10s or 20s. So if you rolled a 20, it was, yes, you roll a 20, I'm up to 40. But whatever your end result number was, not like the D20 system or any offshoots of the D20 or Dungeon and Dragon systems, you did not take that roll and add it to your value. You looked at this chart and some people were like, oh no, it's an extra step. It's not hard. You just look at what you rolled on this chart. So if you rolled a 19, you add a 6 to your value, and that was your total. If it beat the difficulty, you succeeded. If it didn't, you failed. It's not that hard, and I mean, it's hard to just think, oh, I don't add it, but you know, if you're used to D&D, but it's not that bad. Now here you'll see that the 1 is in black, and then these 2, 3, and 4. So a 3 and a 4 would both be negative 8. But you see those are in gray. That meant possibility of disconnect. And I've mentioned a lot that there's this Everlaw of 1 that states that only one reality can exist in the same place, same time. Storm Knights were able to use the Everlaw of 2, which stated that 2 realities could be in the same place at the same time. And what that meant was that if you were doing something as a Storm Knight, and in my early examples of like when I go get the gun, but I'm in a high fantasy reality and I'm facing up against the orc, it might click. And basically that was it. If I am in something that what I am doing, the axioms are higher than what I'm at, the place that I'm in, but it's accepted by me. If I roll a 1, I disconnect. Everlaw of 1 comes in, boom, it severs me, and now I have to act like a person from that reality. So my guns don't work, and there is this weird thing of, does armor protect you, does it not, does it go down? So if I have like a Kevlar vest, does it now become a leather vest? There's all these weird rules and stuff that I won't really get into, but it was basically you're severed, boom. And then you'd have to make a reality roll, and the reality roll was another big chart in Torg, and you can see here this, and I had to write some because by the time this difficulty chart came out, there was other exceptions, but you would find out where you were from. So I'm from Nippon Tech, and I'm in Isle, so I need to roll an 11 reality, or have a difficulty number to reconnect is an 11. So my reality was, say, an 11. Then if I look on my chart, I can see all I needed was that 11. So if I had an 11 or 12 or better, then I would reconnect. If not, it would end up being less than 11, so I would not reconnect. And in original Torg, you could spend possibilities while you were connected, or disconnected, sorry. You just could not receive them. You would not receive experience until you reconnected. But that's kind of a part of the mechanics, and we're doing mechanics now, but I don't want to get super complicated into it. But you could spend possibilities, and a possibility would act as a 10 or 20, and you would roll another d20. You would add that to your first roll, and it counted as a minimum of 10 because you're using that bit of possibility energy, so it counted as a minimum of 10. So if you rolled a 1 through a 9, it counted as a 10. So if you rolled a 2 and you didn't disconnect because what you were doing was below your axiom and below the axioms that you were in, but you wanted to succeed on something, you could roll a possibility. You spend a possibility, roll another d20, and the minimum you're going to get is a 10. That 10 added to the 2, the really low number that you rolled would be a 12 total. 2 plus 10, and then you could look at that 12, which is a 0. So whatever your skill value was, that's what you had rolled. And you had to think as a player, is it worth spending this possibility to succeed if I'm not going to succeed very well? Because depending on how many points were between your difficulty number and what your roll total, not the roll total, what your actual total was. So you rolled, you added up anything that needed to be there, compared it on the chart, got the bonus. Your bonus plus whatever weird things you might have happening. Once you get that done and compare it to your difficulty, the difference was known as the effect value. Whatever that effect value was, you'd have to determine, is that going to be worth it? If I'm only going to beat it by 1 or 2 points, am I actually going to damage the creature? Am I actually going to succeed good enough, or do I just let myself fail this time and use those points later, etc.? So basically it is you roll these dice, you add them all together, you find your bonus number, you add that to your value. And there's always going to be exceptions depending on if you have buffs or debuffs or whatnot on you. But basically the rolls only affected the rolls, and anything else pretty much affected the end number. So if you got a +3 to something or a +2, it wasn't added to your roll, it was added to whatever your value was, not your roll. So that was one thing you had to keep track of. But once people figured out, it's very easy, especially if you haven't had that D20 D&D thing. This came out at 2nd edition, which didn't have that mentality of whatever I roll gets added to the end result. So it was easier learning original Torg, I'm sure, than what Torg Eternity new people are doing now that have experienced Dungeons and Dragons from back then. But it's still, once you get that down, it's pretty simple. And then the subsystems, like I said, they add to that. The 2, 3, and 4 was 4-case possibility of disconnection. And what that meant is I could try to do something above my tech, above my social, above my spirit, etc. And if it was accepted by the realm I'm in, that also would be a 1-case. So a 1-case could be it's under me but above where I am, or it's above me but under where I am. Now if it was above both, then you had a 4-case contradiction, and if you rolled that d20 and you rolled a 1 through a 4, you disconnected. Everlaw of 1, boom! And again, I'm using as if it was, had a conscience and was thinking about things, but it's just if a force discovered you, it would, if the Everlaw of 1 discovered, boom, it cut you off. And if you're doing things higher than both you and the realm you're in, it has a higher chance of cutting you off. It detects that. So that's where your 4 cases come from. So you could have a lizard person, Neednos from the Living Land, doing computers in Nile Empire. But they would disconnect on a roll of 1, 2, 3, 4. So a lot of times you would let the people that had that, at least under them, try that and not have the Edenos. But it was optional. And you would get characters that after being around a while, they would carry around weapons and armor for different realms. So, or other people wouldn't. I had other characters that, even though they were like core Earth people, they carried around bows for when they were in Isle, and they carried around clubs when they were in Living Land, because they didn't want that chance to disconnect. So you could always try to figure that type of thing out and make sure that you were abiding by where you were, or you're taking a chance. It was up to the player of that character to determine if their character was taking that chance. So that's how disconnects work. That's how skills work. You had certain things that had a, like I showed, they'd have a movement rate, and then you'd have a limit value. Let me actually go here. So you'd write in, you get a derived movement like your running was based off of your dex, but you had a limit value because there's only so much a human can actually do. So even a human with a really high stat or with a buff, there's a point where you can't run faster than that. But what Torg did, because Torg is cinematic, and I'll use my adventure screen. So in the very first book, adventure book that I mentioned, they have this nice Game Master screen. And what the Game Master has on here is they have a power push chart. So basically, you can try to make yourself go faster. It gave you less of a point, so when I was talking about effect values of whatever that effect value was, you could take that, and normally that told you what you did. But if you were trying to push something past the limit value, you would take that effect value, you would look at this power push chart, and it would give you a lesser bonus. So like if you had a bonus of 6, which is considered a good, you would look over here and it gives you a +2, and then it shows in parentheses 10. So you, instead of getting a +6, you would get a +2 and you would take 10 shock, which is a lot of shock. So you are just straining yourself. If you're trying to run even faster than like humanly possible and you're putting all your energy into it, you're going to do a little bit more, you're going to get 2 more, and you're going to take a lot of shock. You're going to fatigue yourself a lot. And when I say 2 more, Torg has a logarithmic scale, and they have this another chart. Torg has a lot of charts, but you'll see this value chart, and you'll see over here there's a value and then a measure. So if you had that 10, and that 10 shows to be 100, so you're going at 100 meters per round, and you do that, and you power push, and you push yourself beyond that. You add 2 to it, so that 10 then becomes a 250. So you went 250 meters, which is crazy, because 100 meters, 100-meter dash world record type things are around 10 seconds, which is a round. So you went like 2.5 times farther than most people, humans, are capable of, but you did a lot of damage to yourself. So that's where you can get those really cinematic that are like, in movies, it can happen and it's above what humanly is possible, but you take that fatigue afterwards. And I thought that was a good compromise. The power push table is also used for a lot of magic spells and stuff like that. But you did have these charts, and it might seem like a lot, but you didn't really need all of them all the time. It was mainly, most of the time, people didn't push. They didn't power push if they could just get there and it wasn't super urgent. But then you also have things, you have your combat options, which I will say are not a whole lot. They're good. They fit here. They fit on a little 3 by 5 index card. It is actually a lot less than combat options of Torg Eternity. So Torg Eternity is trying to streamline things. In my opinion, in some ways they didn't actually streamline. They added complexity to things. But it was really nice to have this as a game master. You could set it up, and even your players on the player side would have some of those charts to combat options. And this was interesting because the value chart, you could use the value for time, for weight, for distance, and you could figure out like a 0 is a second, a weight is a kilo, and distance is a meter. And then if you had a value of 15, or let's use something that has one for pretty much all of them. Okay, so a value of 32 is a month. So you went from a second of 0 to a month. You went from 1 kilo to like a 6-story building. in weight, and then distance, 1 meter went from Paris to Moscow. So you could do a lot of easy conversions, and they even had a and I took one that came later because it had more things, but you could currency exchange between things. So it did have a lot of interesting ways to use that value chart. Torg Eternity gives you the value chart, but they really don't tell you what to do with it. A lot of people like it because it streamlines it and allows game masters to have a little more flexibility, but I do like all the things that the value chart was able to do as a game master. I could figure out exactly how, if the person is running as fast as they can, what they do. In Torg Eternity, they do it a completely different way. When I talk about Torg Eternity reviews, I'll get into that, but this is Torg reviews. So that was one of the things you could do. Now there is damage, so when you say, we'll do the example of me shooting the orc. I shoot the orc. I've rolled my dice. If I wanted to spend a possibility to try to boost that die, I would do that. I get to re-roll on 10s and 20s if I have the skill. If I don't have the skill, I only roll on 10s. I don't roll on 20s. I re-roll. So roll again and add. It's not really an exact re-roll. They called it re-roll, but it just meant that you rolled and added. So if I rolled a 10 and I was not trained in the skill, if I was not trained in shooting my gun, I rolled a 10 and I rolled a 5, I get a 15. If I rolled a 20, it's a 20. If I was skilled in it and rolled a 20, then I get to roll again, and if I rolled a 5, I get 25. If I rolled a 10, then I have 30, plus I roll again, rolled a 20, and on certain instances, if you rolled 60 and you had a special card, you could play a glory, and then that would would give you that glorious act that you could tell everybody about and spread that story seed to uprip the stele and take back a piece of core earth away from the High Lords without people becoming what ifs. So how damage worked is, I said you had that effect value of what I rolled total, not the dice roll, but my roll total. So when I rolled, I got my bonus, added it to that, and then I took the difficulty number and I found the difference. If I succeeded, whatever that success was, those points were the effect value. So say my total after my roll, figuring out my bonus, adding it to my skill value, let's just say I had a 15. And I'm shooting at something that had a dodge of a 10. I'm just trying to make it easy. So the effect value was 5. So if I look at my handy chart, if I just wanted to look over here on what success type I had, I could see that that's a good success. So they had minimal, average, good, superior, spectacular. And sometimes, especially with spells and miracles, it would say on a good success it does this, on a spectacular success it does this, and you could figure that stuff out. But if I'm just shooting, I know basically what happens then is you don't quite look at that good spectacular chart. So there was a thing that I thought was awesome, but a lot of people had a problem with, and I'll explain this as I talk about how damage works. So if I shoot and I hit, I use that same bonus number that I generated from my dice roll, and then I add that to my weapons damage and compare that to the armor value of what I'm shooting against. So I say I had, my skill was an 11 and I had a 15. So the 15 means that I rolled a bonus of 4 because my skill value was an 11. My rolls gave me a +4, and that's how I got the 15 to hit. So I hit. Now I take that +4 and I add it to my weapon damage. And then I take that weapon damage and I compare it to the armor value of my opponent. Then whatever the difference is, that is like the damage value, and then I look at my chart, and depending on if I'm firing against an ord or a possibility rated person, I look on that chart. And again, this seems like it's complicated, and I might not be explaining things very well because I'm trying to do this without you here and for us and me to be able to point at certain things. But it's not terrible because the game master is the one that tells you how much damage. So he could, if I had a gun and it does a base value of 15, let's say, and then I add those 4 bonus points that I rolled and looked on my chart, and it's the same number. I hit. Okay, now I look at that 4. I add it to my weapon of 15. I have a 19, and then you look at the target, and the target has let's say they have a armor value of 15. Just trying to make it easy. So 15 minus 19, or 19 minus 15 is 4. So there's 4 result points. So I look on my possibility. If I'm going up against a possibility rated creature or threat, I look at the 4, and that 2 there means 2 shock. And if I look over at the ord, it's O3. The O is there's 3 types of damage. There is shock, there is KO. Oh, actually there's 4. One's not really damage, it's a knockdown. There is shock, there's getting KO'd, there is wounds, and then there's a knockdown. So this chart here, depending on if you're an ord or if you're possibility rated, will tell you all of what type of damages you take. Now, shock damage, you take shock. And once that equals your toughness attribute, you fall unconscious. And then you heal 1 point of shock every minute. So after a couple of minutes, you're conscious again. It's just fatigue. It can be fatigue or just getting hit but not actually taking wounds, things like that. Then they had what were called KO. In KO, you had to get the K and you had to get the O, and then you're KO'd. If you got an O, you didn't worry about it because you didn't have a K first. If you got a K, you're fine. If you get another K without the O, you take 2 points of shock. So that adds to your shock. But you don't get like 2 Ks or anything. So you had to have a K condition. These were called conditions. K condition. An O condition would happen, and then you're knocked out. And then I can't remember the exact amount of time. Either a minute you lose maybe 10 minutes you lose the O, and then a minute later you lose the K, and then you can come back out. And then the wounds that actually hurt, and that could lead to death. So you couldn't get shocked to death. You couldn't get KO'd to death. A few of these things had a knockdown, which just meant you fell down and had to get back up. And then the wounds, which were the actual 1, 2, 3 dead. So those were the ones you had to worry about. Now, the two normal things that Storm Knights could use that possibilities for, that possibility energy, they had those points, and they normally started off with 10. And I showed you that the Ravagons started off with 5, but if you look here, you can see possibilities 10. So most characters started off with 10 possibilities. Some of them had to use possibilities to pay for things. Some got to choose to pay for things. But if you had a possibility, you could do that extra roll, that additional roll added to your previous rolls. You could even do it if they exploded. So you rolled a 10, then you rolled a 5, you have a 15. You want to do a little bit more, spend a possibility, roll another d20, add it to that. 10s and 20s explode. If you have the skilled, if you're not, they explode only on 10s. Ordinary people, not possibility rated, they only exploded on 10s. So there was a little, if you're a game master, you had to keep track of ordinary people as well and do them different. And like I showed you, they had a different damage. At one point, they published a 1 chart for both Ords and Reality, and that was if the Game Master decided that the war had drained enough possibility energy out of Earth to basically hurt possibility rated characters and put them kind of in the same line as Ords. But that was a Game Master decision. The other thing that Storm Knights could use that possibilities for, that possibility energy, is they could use it to soak. And in original Torg, you got what was known as 3 packets. And packets meant different things. It could be a knockdown. It could be 3 points of shock. It could be a KO condition, or it could be a wound. So if I'm looking here, and let's say that say I get hit pretty hard, and say that I take, say I have a 14 result point against me, and I take 2 wounds, K and O, and 5 shock, and I don't want to take that. The setting, the fluff of it is, as a Storm Knight able to look, to have possibility energy, I can look through the Cosmverse, and I can look at some place that I might not got hit, or I might not got hit as bad, and I spend the possibility, and I choose my fate is different than what it should be, and now I'm not hurt as much. What this allowed was to get rid of 3 packs. So I spend 1 possibility and I get 3 packs. Now, I've only taken 2 wounds, a KO condition, and 5 shock. So I could spend that, get those 3 packs, and if I spent 2 of them on 1 wound each, a wound, I only have 1 packet left. That either can get rid of that KO condition and I'm not knocked out, or if I get rid of 3 of the shock, then I only take 2 shock and get knocked out. So depending on what shock I have, if I've already taken shock in the game, I might get knocked out with the shock. If I take the 2 wounds off and the KO so I don't get knocked out, but I have 5 shock, if I have enough other shock from previous attempts, I might get knocked out. So in those cases, you might actually let 1 of the wounds go through. Yes, the wounds get you closer to death, but you might not get knocked out. And it only worked against the damage that you were taking at that instant. So you couldn't go way back in time and, take off damage. So it's called soak damage from 5 shots ago. I've already been hit 3 times since then. It had to be whatever affected you then. But you got 3 packets, so that allowed you to mitigate some damage. Torg Eternity is a completely different system. We'll talk about in those, but in Torg, that's how the soaking works. So those were the 2 things that you could use possibilities for normally as a Storm Knight. You could boost your action, whatever skill total you were going, and you could do shock. And since you're shooting and you use the same bonus number, if you spent that possibility and upped your roll, it would normally give you a bigger bonus number, so you would do more damage. Now there is a flaw in the system. I don't think is a flaw, and it's known as the Glassjaw Ninja. The Glassjaw Ninja means that ninjas, and it doesn't have to exactly be a ninja, but it could be any martial artist or anybody who has a super high dexterity skill, or a super high melee weapons, super high defenses, that doesn't wear a lot of armor, that they're relying on their maneuverability. And because it would take so much of a bonus number to be able to actually hit them, since the same bonus number was used for damage to add to your weapon, it was hard to hit them, but once you hit them, they were hurt. They were in a world of pain. And a lot of people didn't like it, and I think they're the ninja players who had ninja characters, because you have an ordinary person and 100 times they're shooting at you and missing you, and then on the 101st time they hit you and they're possibly kill you, possibly hurt you very bad, and they didn't like that. So there was all these fixes. I tried a few of the fixes because I had a couple of people that played martial artists, and I took their concerns and I looked on various online, it wasn't as big an online community stuff as we have now, but I found a few little things. I found all the fixes were problems when you had characters that didn't have defenses. It actually made it worse. It really hurt characters who built their character not on fighting but on other things, and I'll explain what those other things could be. So I don't like it. And the other thing is, if you're not getting hit 100 times, yeah, then when the guy actually gets through, actually hits you, boom, he should hurt you. So I never saw it as a problem. And it's really hard to completely kill a Storm Knight. You would have to, here, you see, even on 15, it's only 3 wounds. So if you were unharmed, it would take every 2 after that. Every 2. So 16 would still be 3 wounds, KO, 5 shock. It would take a 17 to get to that 4 wounds to kill you. That's a huge effect value, a huge number of what is needed for that. So I really never had a problem that I could see with the Glassjaw Ninja, basically because I felt all the other characters, Storm Knights, that might not have as high defenses, they're getting hit all the time and they're taking shock all the time. You get hit once, you spend 1 possibility, you have 3 packets also. So as long as you have 1 possibility, even that 17 is not going to kill you. You could get rid of a lot of that damage. You might have some leftover knocking you out, but if you put all 3 of those into wounds, you could have 4 plus 3, 7 wounds, which on that chart, the 4th wound was at 17, the 5th wound would be at 16, or sorry, 17, 19, 21. So you could have like a 21 effect value, which is amazingly huge before you are automatically dead. So for me, it wasn't a problem because all the time, all your friends are getting hit, you're not getting hit. That's just my opinion. The way I saw it is not a problem. So that's how damage works. That's how skills works. We get into cards. So there's a big stack of cards that came with the deck called the Drama, or came with the game called the Drama deck. If I take out these, I believe 13 or so cards, it came with 156 cards, and then it came with a bunch of blank cards that later on in the Infiniverse that they published, they would print off, they would make new cards. So I printed those off and then I glued them, and then later I put them in the little plastic sleeves. But these were all later additions. But each card, and I'll just choose the first one, has 2 sides. So you see this side here has 2, it says adrenaline. If you flip it over, it says they're on the run, and it has all these things here, and then you have this middle one that says skill. So what is this? This is a drama deck. This is used by both game masters to flip for initiative and to know how many rounds are going, and for interesting things they had that they call DSRs, dramatic skill resolutions. But first we're going to do players. So at the beginning of the game, each player gets 4 cards. So let me give myself 4 cards. So I have 4 cards. And if I point them all, and actually I'm going to have to choose different cards, otherwise they're all going to be exactly the same. And I want to show how, I want to show a few cards. Okay, so I have my 4 cards, and if I'm not in combat, I can use these cards at any time I feel like it. Anytime I roll a skill and want to add something to it, I can use a card. So here I have an adrenaline card, and this means I get to add 3 to my value, not my roll, but my value, my end value of dex, strength, or toughness, or a related skill. So that is good anytime I'm shooting a gun or trying to lift something, or even possibly survive some damage. Here is a willpower. This one is perception or mind. So a lot of spells would be a good for the willpower. And again, it adds 3 to the value, not to the roll. Here's an opponent fails. Boom. If they're trying to do something and they're going to hit you, if you're that glass-jawed ninja and he shoots you and you have one of these, you go, nope, he failed. And then a drama card, which this could be used like a possibility. Also, remember this for tomorrow when I talk about one of the cons of my opinion of Torg. Here, the drama, you could use it as a hero card, which meant a hero card was you use it like a possibility, or it can be turned in after the adventure for 3 possibilities. So you can use it now for 1 possibility, or if you hold on to it and you never spend it and you get to the end of the adventure, you turn it in and you get 3 possibilities to either use in the future to cut down some of your possibility cost if you have pulp powers, or you're from a race that has a possibility cost, or experience. Okay? Now, I will be bringing this up tomorrow, so make a mental note of this drama card. So while I'm not in combat, I can use these whenever I feel like it. In combat, at the end of my turn, if I've done an action or at least attempted to do something, even if it is move to a better position, if I'm doing something that moves the scene along, so I'm not just sitting there twiddling my thumbs, I'm actually doing something, participating in the game. I have all these cards in what's considered my hand. I put 1 card into my pool. And the book suggested to keep them secret and not let other players know, but all my players always were like, hey, I got this, I got this, I got this, so they can coordinate. And I never, as a game master, had a problem with my players coordinated. So, but once you did that, you know, whether it's face up or face down, once you did an action or did something, it didn't have to actually be an action. Like I said, you could just move into a better position. If I'm not seeing my enemy and I have to get over there to see them, or if I'm hiding behind a crate over here and there's something over here that's important, and I'm not necessarily a combat person, but I run to get to that important thing, I'm moving the scene along. So you put it into your pool. If it's in your pool, you can use it. You can't use it if it's in your hand. And you can trade 1 card for 1 card with the other players. But if I'm not in combat, I can do hand to hand, and if I am in combat, I can do a pool to pool. So if I have something in my hand and somebody has it in their pool, we can't trade those. It has to be a 1-for-1 in the same hand or pool. At the end of combat, the cards go back into your hand and you have to do it again. So as you get through combat each turn, you put a card in, and those are ready and they can be played. So the more cards you have, the more you can affect things. There are ways to get cards. Those are called approved actions. We'll get to that when we look at the other side. So that was the player side, the drama, the willpower. Now we have the other side, which is the game master side. So this one says, that old chestnut. It's a little hard to see. Okay. So here you'll notice, hopefully, that you have an S, meaning a standard scene. So there's 2 types of scene. There's standard and dramatic. Standard was just your normal scene, normally the first 4 scenes in an act, and then the 5th scene, because most acts were 5, but some were less. So the first acts, as you're getting to the big bad, or the main point of an act, are standard. And then it's dramatic once you get to that last goal of the act, the goal basically. So if I'm in a standard scene and I'm the game master and I have my big deck and I flip it over, boom. The very first initiative, we see the heroes go first and there's nothing there, and the villains go last and there's nothing there. So all the heroes go, and once they're done, then all the villains go, and then you flip a new card. Now if it's a dramatic scene, you'll see dramatic. It said, what are the heroes? They're set backed. And that D is funny because it should just be a setback. So then as a game master, I have to come up with crazy things that might happen to make a player have a problem. And one of those subsystems was cyberpsychosis. So if you had any players that had characters that had cyberware, setback meant they got to make cyberpsychosis checks, and then all types of weird stuff could happen. But for other people, you might have like a building next to them has been shot a lot and it comes down, or a tree and they have to make a dexterity check, or you give them a negative to their next action just as a game master. And for the players, sometimes if you get your players into it and you can trust them not to just go, oh, I'm not set back, nothing happened to me, or oh, I got a hangnail. You know, if they actually could come up with something interesting, you can let your players come back, you know, up with a setback. But basically that meant that something happened and all the players would have some type of setback. And then the villain over here, it says test and taunt. And what that meant is if you had a villain and they succeeded at a test or a taunt, they could take one of the player's cards. And now the player doesn't have the cards. And then you'll see act. This means approved action. And if you remember when I showed you the sheet, they had right here said approved. So these were what was called approved actions, maneuver and taunt. So if somebody in the group didn't just shoot and they tried to use their skills of maneuver and taunt and succeeded, they got to draw a card from the deck. And that's how you would get more cards. Like I said, you started off with 4 and then you spent them. How do you get more? You get more by succeeding in approved actions. Now they did have ones that were attack, and that just meant you had to hit. You didn't actually have to do damage. And then they had ones that were defend, which if you did an active defense, then if you were not hit, you got a card. Now if you were hit and took no damage, you were still hit, so you didn't succeed in that. But they gave a mechanical absolute reason to do things. And when you maneuvered and taunt, there was that the Game Master screen, the charts. That's why I love this Game Master screen so much. As you can see, I've taped it to keep it from falling apart because it's so useful. You could look up it here and they would have the different things. So if I'm taunting and my skill result, I could make them unskilled, so now they're not re-rolling on 20s. I can make them stymied, which they lose their next ability that would get them an additional roll, whether that, no matter what source it came from, to being set back themselves. And then if you go all the way up to like 17, player's call. That means the player could say, like, I've taunted them so much that they're going to attack me. That's a player's call. I've intimidated them so much that they run away. That's a player's call. Now, if it's a big bad, you do get to maybe have to interact with your game master. Game master and players decide on what a result of that is, so you had to give a little back and forth. But if it's just an ordinary person or somebody not important, have them run away, have them, you know, do whatever. They succeeded by a lot to get that. So you had things like that. And then the last thing was your skill, and that was when you had a dramatic skill resolution, and you see A, B, C. There's 4 steps in a skill, dramatic skill resolution. And the easiest way to think about this is think about all the movies that you get to a point where there is a bomb and you have to defuse it. And there's 4 steps, A, B, C, D. So A, you might have to figure out how to open the bomb without it exploding, or to open the bomb. And then so you might have, when step A is there, it means that you get to have that chance of opening that bomb. If the B is there, then you can do the next step, which might be figuring out which wire to cut, and etc., all the way to when the exact defusing happens. And you could use different skills, you know, for that. It would probably be maybe like heavy weapons or with a mind instead of dex, or if they have a munitions or some type of skill, science, something like that. They could be anything from a propeller dies and somebody has to climb on the wing of an airplane and fix it, and then is able to get back. So these were called dramatic skill resolutions, which were just a little bit more than what a normal skill would be. Tharkold used these for their grid. So instead of going into the GodNet and having all those sub rules, they just put it under this DSR. So if I needed to do that if I'm just starting, and let's see, I don't have any here, but say I have this card here. This only has a C and a D. So I can't do anything. But if I actually do step A, if I do whatever it was, and I succeed, I could get a card. So that counted as, could count as approved actions in ways. And then there's other things that could happen. There could be complications. So instead of it saying, like this one says A, B, and C, which is if you're on step A, you can try it. If you're on step B, you can try it. You're on step C, you can try it. If it's a complication, it might add a problem. And you'd have certain things like that. Like here is only an A and B. So if I'm on step C and this card gets on initiative, step C can't be done. And you normally had 6 rounds in original Torg to do it. Each round's 10 seconds, around 10 seconds. So 6 rounds is like 1 minute, which is the stereotypical cinematic bomb needs to be defused. Oh no, we're doing a countdown. It's usually, at a minute. So I like that aspect of the DSR. So that's how DSRs work. And again, you could use it for all different types of situations. It's usually just something that you needed that would take more than just, roll a computer, roll, heavy munitions, roll of this, roll of that. It was like when the stakes were high and you had a dramatic thing, not just diffusing the thing, but also other people are, the bad guys are attacking us also, so other people are doing other things. It's part of the rounds. So they heroes go first, they might get set back, they might be up. Up was you just roll a die, you add it to it. It wasn't the minimum of 10 like a possibility. There's all different types that all these cards could have. Like here, the villains go first. On both of them, the heroes flurry. That means all the heroes go, and then they all go again. And it's within that same 10 seconds, but they're just so jazzed up. They're just so adrenaline going that they actually get to do everything twice. The villains, though, they get to go up. They go first and they're up. That means they add the extra little die to it. So both sides have some advantage, and it's different. And there's just so many of these cards. So like here, the first one is the villains, or villains go first on both of them, but the heroes are set back, so they might have a bad problem. And then there we go. Finally got a really good zoom in. The heroes are fatigued. That means that they take shock. They take, depending on what type of armor they are, they take shock points as fatigue as they're getting worn down. So there's all of these really cool things that could happen. There's a lot of these heroes. I'm trying to find one. Okay, here's one, because I want to find one that they're actually different. I had so many where so on this one, let's see if I can get that in here. So on standard, the heroes go first, but on dramatic, the villains go first. On standard, the villains might break. They might run away. They might decide that they've had enough. And the villains on the dramatic, they go first and they get that up. They get that extra roll, and the heroes are flurried, and then maneuver and intimidate are the approved actions. And sometimes there wasn't any approved action. Just succeed in anything. Just try to do anything. Don't just sit there and you can get a card if you succeed. This drama deck was amazing when you learn how to do it. And the Torg, the main Torg book, which is probably now buried under all these, this book went through all of them and told you what each one of those card conditions did. So it really, once you started learning what it was, you could get a little list where you just write, if it's this, it's this. If it's this, an up means this, a setback means this, and make it pretty easy to do. So that's how the cards work. There is two sides. And another thing that was interesting, where if a card was played by a player, it goes in the discard, so it's not going to be there to be used for initiative. If the card is used for initiative, it's not going to be there to be able to be used by a player. So it was, you couldn't really count cards like you do in blackjack, because you didn't know when that card might come up. And so there is lots of things that could happen. Like I showed you, there's adrenaline, willpower. There was a presence one that worked for, I believe, spirit and charisma. Opponent fails, I showed you. There was a just lots of different cards. That hero card that I mentioned, it could be used as a possibility. The drama card that I want you to remember, because that could be used like a hero card, like a possibility. And if you held on to it, you got 3 possibilities at the end of the adventure. There was the glory. Glorious in a dramatic scene, doing something dramatic. You roll, and the die roll, not the total at the end, but the die roll total. If you got that at a 60, somebody could play that glory card, and boom, you had a glorious moment that you could then tell to people as a story seed, plant that story seed, get the generate that possibility energy within the ordinary people, allow them to be able to have another transformation, rip those stelae up, and set that piece of core earth free. So you could, if you rolled really good, say I rolled that 20 and then I roll a 9, I got a 29. Now I spend a possibility, boom, I get to roll. Say I rolled an 11. Okay, so that's 29 plus an 11, that is 39, 40. Now I spend a drama. Okay, I decide not to hold that. I spend that drama. Boom, I roll a 15. In Old Torg, if you had another hero, you could do another hero. Or say that I didn't, but my neighbor has a hero in their action pool, so I trade them a card from my action pool, and I get that hero, and I play it. If I get above that 60, then boom. And with the glory card, similar to the drama, and this is why I might play that drama, I could have held that, and that card would have given me 3 possibilities at the end of the adventure. But if somebody plays a glory, everybody in the party gets those 3 as additional at the end of the adventure. So I use my drama, I don't have those 3, but myself and everybody else will get those 3 possibilities. So that's an advantage. This is obviously going to be a long video, but it's going to be kind of like that setting video. I have mentioned a lot of things, different subsystems. When you had Isle, you had spells, so you had to learn how to work with this generic, or the base core mechanic of generating this. You would use your magic skills. You would have 2 things that you had to compare it to. You would compare it to the difficulty, and that's, did I cast or not? And then you had to compare it to the backlash, and the backlash might be lower than the difficulty, or it could be, it depended. What you rolled compared to the difficulty was, did it succeed and how good? Compared to the backlash was, do I take damage? So you could succeed in a spell, and if your backlash was higher, you still might take some damage. And then if you rolled really low, you could really take a lot of damage, possibly even hurting and killing yourself. So that was always a possibility, and why you might want to have a possibility to make sure that you don't kill yourself. Clerics had faith and focus. They used their faith to determine that, how well did I do, and then they used that how well did I do to add to their focus, which was how well was the effect. So the one was how well did I cast it, but that didn't exactly perfectly translate to how good is the effect. If you provided both, great, but if you needed somebody else to provide that faith, then it could complicate things. So there was 2 actual things: faith Did I succeed? How well did I succeed with focus? So that's how miracles worked. You had martial artists, which had a list of martial art techniques. At the beginning, they had a certain number, and I believe it was 9. They had 9 tests that they could do. And if you failed, then you could use your next test for that. And that would determine how many starting martial art techniques you had. Then there was cyberware, which I said had its own subsystem of cyberpsychosis that could take effect when you had each piece of cyberware you had a cyber value, and that would all get added up, and then you would roll with that as a bonus, a bad bonus, that could give you cyberpsychosis. That usually was something detrimental. There was a small chance that actually you might come out better with the cyberpsychosis. So that's something that was a subsystem. Psionics was a subsystem. So there's basically almost every realm had some type of subsystem. Also in Nippon Tech, besides martial artists, you could have the business, playing the stock market was a subsystem. So there's just tons and tons and tons of subsystem. As you saw, it might seem complicated, but you roll your d20, it explodes when it explodes. You can put possibilities into it, which are making it kind of explode. You add up that, the rolls, the dice rolls. You add up the dice rolls, you take that total, look at your bonus chart, find your bonus, add that bonus to your value. If you had other bonuses, you added that. Kind of like with the cards, like adrenaline. You take that, you compare it to your difficulty, that is, do I succeed? Then you could take that same bonus and add it to your damage, your weapon or your spell for damage possibly, or you could, if you're taunting and intimidate, you just take the difference, whatever that effect value was, and look on the charts. And again, that's what it made it hard for the Game Master. Game Master had to have all these charts and figure out where things were or memorize it. 20 plus years and I still have not memorized these charts. So you as a Game Master, you had all those charts. As a player, you didn't have to worry about any of that. You just had to worry about your little bonus and what subsystems you did. So if you're a mage, you only had to worry about magic. If you're a cleric, you only had to worry about miracles and how faith and focus worked, etc. The Game Master just had to have all of those things. So yes, I've talked about. I glossed over subsystems. Again, if you want me to get into detail about subsystems, please write in the comments, and I might do that in future videos. Because, again, I'm at an hour and 17 minutes here talking just about the mechanics, the core part. Talked about the drama deck. There was rules in this source book to how to do it without a drama deck using a D20. The drama deck is so, in my opinion, integral to Torg as a system to get that cinematic feel. It's great. Even as a game master, if I have this big, huge plan and all these machinations all set up, and then I have players, who are doing their little, doing their one action, doing their next action, doing their next action, and then all of a sudden there's a chain reaction of, I rolled good, I throw down a hero card, I have an adrenaline card, and there is one called a supporter, which you didn't use for yourself, but you used for your buddy, and then your buddy throws a supporter on it, and boom, you got, this glorious deed, the supporter and the adrenaline even boosted the success higher, wow, and you take something out, and even as a game master, if I completely made something of mine, just like, blew up my big bad end guy in the first round, it was still like and normally it wasn't the first round because you didn't have the card. You couldn't use your cards in the first round. You had to slip it in. But say in the second round or in the third round, and you have all this chain reactions and your table gets excited. I mean, there's jumping up and down like, yeah, I did it. You have to determine, is it worth it? Is it not? If I spend my possibility, is it going to, is it going to be worth it? Well, it usually is going to be a 10, so it's probably worth it. you get an up or you get a flurry and everybody goes and then everybody goes again, and so you put a card in and then you put another card in and you have two. It's like all of this stuff is just like the cards really make it cinematic. You can play without the cards. There are rules for it, and there's even rules in here for if you have bigger or smaller groups. If you have like more than 5 people, you might only give them 3 cards. If you have less than 3 people, then you want to give everybody 5 cards. So depending on how many people you have, you adjust your card size so that you can have these really big groups. Normal, my games were 6 to 8 people. I let them have 4 cards until I got to the big games where I had all my groups coming for our Halloween game, and I'd have 20 to 25 people, and then it's like everybody, you get like 2 cards because there's a lot of cards out there otherwise. But that's the mechanics. That is the core mechanics. Not very difficult. You roll, you find a bonus, you add that bonus to your value. Everything else is like any other game, exceptions out there. So yes, it can get complicated, but it can get complicated in D&D and Pathfinder and what other systems. Once you start having spell effects and bonuses and penalties, those add and subtract. And yes, but the simple base mechanic is you roll, you deal with explosions and possibilities and ups. Once you get all those rolls totaled, all the d20 numbers totaled, you take that, you look at your bonus. That bonus is added to the skill value, adjusted however, take that, that's what you got. That's your total. That total is compared to a difficulty value, depending on whatever the difficulty value is, and the result points then, you can, depending on what subsystem you're using, and what chart as a game master, which is harder for the game master, whichever chart they're having to look at here, they tell you what happened. And the last thing I did want to say is they do have, if you look right here, they have a difficulty number scale. So if somebody brings up something completely random and there's not a rule about it and you're just like, I don't know, you could look at that and just give a difficulty number. Sure, roll and try against it. Anything for very easy is a 3. So easy as a difficulty number, all the way up to never tell me the odds of 25. They have 1,000 to 1, 100 to 1, heroic 10 to 1, difficult 2 to 1 against, average, easy, very easy. And then they just gave you a difficulty number, or if there was another difficulty number, but for some reason something happened to complicate matters, then they gave you a modifier to use. So you could then look at the modifier and give that modifier as well to the end result, not to the roll, but to the end result. Add or subtract that modifier, and then compare it to your original difficulty number. So really good tools for the game master. Again, it could be difficult to the game master, but if you prep and you only worry about what you need and you don't worry about every single subsystem. Like I said, I had one player that had a character with psionics. No one else did. I never really had to learn the psionic rules except for when that character started. That player didn't stay in that game very long. So then I never had to worry about that rule again. Now, if I would ever have that happen again, yeah, I'm going to have to learn that, but you don't have to learn what's not being used. It's not needed. I do want to thank you very much. I hope I didn't mess anybody up with how the mechanics work. That core mechanic of rolling, finding the bonus and adding it to the skill value, that core is exactly the same as in Torg Eternity. That method is exactly the same. There's slight adjustments in numbers and such, but the mechanic of roll, explode, take that total roll, compare that to the bonus chart, that bonus add to my value to get a number, that is exactly the same. And that's why I will say Torg original is Torg, Torg eternity is Torg. They both have that core concept in there. They both have cards and possibilities. And so tomorrow we'll kind of do a wrap up. I will point out the drama card and another card and pros, cons that I think about Torg original. And then maybe the very following day, if I don't give myself a day break, I'll get into Torg Eternity. And really, for some reason, today I don't think that the camera's been focusing very well. So I do apologize if there was a lot of blurring in it. But I was able a few times to get those cards up close. So once again, if you like it, you can hit like. If you dislike, you can hit dislike. If you subscribe, I'd appreciate it. I am Lehman Crafton, aka Zorvalachan, Less Than Guru, and I hope you've been enjoying these videos so far. And until next time,